back to Beginning Guitar. Today is day 12 in your journey, and go listen to that band. They make one good song that everyone knows, and if you don't believe me, well, don't stop believing. Okay, so now that the pun is out of the way, let's roll into the material for the day, which is, first, what are notes? We play guitar, and we do a lot of things, but we don't always know what the heck we're doing. So let's just talk about what a note is, okay? So if you look at a keyboard or if you look at your guitar, there is an assortment of notes. But a note is just a tone, something you hear in space, whether it's the leaf blower, some paper ruffling or rustling, maybe your phone makes a noise like a notification bell or something, or even just the sip of a coffee. There was a note there. There was a little dribble note. Or the sound of a coffee grinder. Everything that you hear can be translated to a note. Okay. Now, those notes are organized on the keyboard because it's easy to visualize that way. And that's why I teach you on the guitar how to look with your mind's eye onto the keyboard. Because it's all kind of laid out there. With the guitar, I mean, how are you supposed to know what note is where, right? I mean, it's easy for me from experience, but for you, it's probably impossible if you're starting out, okay? But that will change. And it's just like a language. At first you're like, what is this hieroglyphic crap? And then you do a lot better later and you're like, wow, I can't believe I didn't understand this. And you feel like you unlocked a part of your brain. Okay, now let's define what the notes are on that keyboard. So obviously, if you just look up on Google Images or whatever search engine you use, piano or keyboard or notes or something, you're gonna see how it's laid out. You're gonna see C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, right? And C again. So you're gonna see that layout. On the guitar, you're not gonna see that. You might see some charts that show what the notes are, but that gets really confusing really fast, at least for me. I get overwhelmed by all that. It's like I don't need to look at that for longer than a second. Anyway, how we organize the notes goes like this. We give names to all 7 of the notes that you would normally find in a scale. So it's impossible to define note without also talking about scales. And I'm not talking about the skin that snakes have. I'm talking when you have the keyboard and you play all of the white keys, you're only playing 7 notes. If you're playing from one unique note to another. What I mean by that is if you go from the C note to the next C note, you're playing 7 different notes in between. And that's normal. The number 7, prime number, really interesting lucky number, is very important in music. It's used a lot. So 7 total unique notes in a normal Western scale. What I mean by that is if you're in the eastern part of the world, they have all these things like semitones, microtones. They have many different systems, and they may not agree with me when I say there are 7 notes in a scale. They might say that there are a lot more. So, and other people might be pedantic and say, oh, there are only 5 notes in a scale. Look at my pentatonic. And then they whip out the pentatonic, right? Just, oh, no, what are you talking about? 7 notes, 5 notes. See, just 5 notes. Well, that's true, technically. But I digress, and let's get into it. So 7 different notes in your widely accepted Western ideology, institution, whatever. So before we get into playing today, let's define them. The first note that you would start with, so the very first note that you hear, if you're playing a song maybe, or I don't know, if you're trying to build your scale, the first note, also known as a scale degree, is called the tonic. And I'm not talking like summertime, grab a glass. I'm talking, this is called a tonic, T-O-N-I-C. So T-O-N kind of sounds like tone. So you hear a tone, and that is your tonic. So it is the tone that you are starting with. It's number 1. Number 2 is called the subdominant. Don't get into why just yet. Just accept it for what it is. It's called the subdominant. The third one is called the mediant, okay? in my mind, 3 being mediant kind of weirdly makes sense. But anyway, it's called the mediant. Then you have the 4th note, which is called the predominant. Okay. Then the 5th note is called the dominant. The 6th one is called the submediant. And the 7th one is the subtonic or accidental or, I think either of those names will do. But what I'm trying to show you is that we can assign names to these 7 different notes, these 7 distinct tones in a normal scale. And that way when you refer to them, and you might never say to people, hey, Robert, can you take that mediant and just flatten it? Or some people do. I mean, us theorists, we love to speak in this term because when we use this terminology, it kind of reinforces the distinction. It allows us to communicate clearly, which is hard to do enough, with simple stuff. Anyway, it's important for you to recognize, if anything at all, that the standard scale has 7 distinct notes, 7 distinct tones, okay? Which brings me into part 2, okay? What is a chord, right? If you have all these notes and you have 7 distinct, 7 unique tones, how do you make a chord? Do you just randomly pull them out? No. So a chord is typically 2 or more notes, which in most cases comes out to 3. So usually it's about 3 distinct notes that make up that chord. You can compose them any way you want, really. You can have fun making all sorts of cool chords. Just use 3 notes, okay? Now, traditionally, if you look at these 7 notes I'm talking about, these 7 notes in the scale, and you take 3 of them, you put them together, they'll either sound good or bad. What people figured out is that 1, 3, and 5 sound very good together. So if you start with an A note, for example, that would be number 1, your tonic. Number 2 would be some kind of B note. Number 3 would be some kind of C note. It just follows an alphabetical musical progression. So A, then C, and now we need the 5. So if we're counting from A as 1, we have A, B, C, D, E, some kind of E. So we have A as 1, C as 3, and E as 5. And if you play those 3 notes together at the same exact time, A, C, E, you have a chord. That chord is a minor chord. Hold on, what's minor? Well, that I cannot explain unless I explain the most important thing and the whole point of this video today. Intervals. So intervals are just distances between tones. That's it. Distances between tones. So if you have an A note and you have an A sharp note, on the keyboard, it's one white key and the little black key right next to it. That distance between that A note and the A sharp note is called a half step. On that keyboard and on the guitar, there is nothing smaller, technically, nothing smaller that you can produce. You just play the A or the A sharp, right? And that is called a half step. But as you progress into music, as you get involved in music and start playing guitar, it's important for you to recognize the names. The half step is a perfectly good name to describe when you're moving from one note to the nearest possible note, which means that if you're going from the B note to the C note, that's also a half step because there's nothing in between them. If you're going from the E note to the F note, same thing. It's right next door. There's nothing in between, so it is a half step. But a better way to refer to it is calling it a minor second. That means that you're going from the first one, A, to the second one, but it's such a short step. It's so small that we refer to it as a minor. So from the first to the second tone you hear, there is a minor, a small step. Now let's say that you wanted to play A and then play B. That would be called a major second because you're stepping over that A sharp. You're stepping over it and onto the next tone. So You skip the one in between, and that's what makes it a major second. So it's a big step, it's bigger. And the same logic goes for the third. If you go from the A to the C note, so you're skipping over A sharp, you're skipping over B, and going straight to C. That jump from A to C is called a minor third, because if C is number 3, there's going to be two kinds. There's going to be C normal, and then there's going to be that little black note above C called C sharp. So if you jumped from A to C, that's called a minor third, the smaller of the two thirds. So now you go from A to C sharp, that's a bigger jump, that's called a major third. So you're starting to see the pattern. All across the keyboard and all down the fretboard, you have these interval distances between tones, and those distances are referred to specifically, and that really helps later on because we're going to build chords. We're going to talk about how chords are constructed, what makes a chord major, what makes a chord minor, but you're not going to understand what that means unless you understand the intervals that support the chords, okay? So if we continue on with this logic, I'm just going to fill you in on the rest of the detail for this interval idea, and then we'll get to playing. So we stopped at the major third, which would have been from A to C sharp. So again, the smallest possible distance, minor second. A little bit bigger than that, one more half step up, is a major second. Keep going by one more half step. You're seeing we're always going by half steps, right? So one more half step would be the minor third. Then another half step would give us the major third. Here's what we got to change just a little bit. So from A to C sharp gave us the major third. If we go up to the next possible tone, it would be D. So that's a fourth of some kind. When we refer to the fourths, we don't use major and minor. Instead, we say that it's a perfect fourth. If it's A to D, it's a perfect fourth. If you go to the D sharp, so just a little bit above that fourth, just a little bit above the D to D sharp, that's what we call a sharp 4, or an augmented fourth, or what we call a tritone. This point, this tritone, is the middle point for the entire scale. It is the center point. So from A to D sharp is what we call the tritone, and that is halfway. So now we're halfway, we're on the D sharp, we're going to step up to E. That's going to be some kind of 5. So A to E would be what we call a perfect fifth. So we're moving that perfect fifth distance, and then we go up a little bit more. So we go from A to E, but instead of E, we go up to the next possible tone, which is F. So A to F is a kind of 6. This is where we drop back into that major minor idea. So if we go from A to F, that's what we call a minor 6. So the F is right above the E. The E was the A to the E was the perfect fifth, right? Right. Now the A to the F is a minor 6th. If we go to the F sharp, it's going to be the major version of the 6, so it's major 6th. And finally, we get to the last possible unique tone, which in this case is G. So we go from A to G. That's a minor 7th. And if we go to the very last possible distal note, from A, all the way from A at the bottom to G sharp, it's a major 7th. And the next thing that follows is the A again, which would be the complete octave, oct for 8. So it's the 8th tone. Okay. So hopefully you're able to follow along with that process and kind of start to visualize that everything on the guitar and everything on the piano can be broken down into half steps, little tiny steps. And we just call those steps, we add those steps up, I should say, and we call them something. So on your guitar, if you join me and look at your guitar, you're going to find that on these fretboards, or on the fretboard and on these frets, are these metal bars, and those metal bars just divide your fretboard. Every single space is a half step. So that means that if this is an E note, and then I hold down that first fret, I'm stepping up by a half step, or as we learned, by a minor second. So if we were to play the open E and then skip over this, we would be playing the major second. So if we continue with the logic, now we go to the third possible tone. And if we're stepping right here, right above that major 2, it's going to be minor 3. And if we step above the minor 3 by 1 fret, we become major. So we have major 3. Step up again, and recall that after the major third, we go to a fourth. So from A to D. Remember, that one is called a perfect fourth. So then right above that is the special one, the middle point, the tricky sounding one, called the tritone. It's also the Simpsons theme. So the Simpsons. All right. So from E to this A sharp, from the 1 to this sharp 4, we have a tritone. Next, we have the 7th fret and the 5th scale degree. So from E to B is a perfect 5th. Up one more fret gives us the minor 6th. Up one more, gives us the major 6th. Up one more gives us the minor 7th. And lastly, the major 7 before the octave. And this works with every single string on your guitar. So you can always use that logic. If you do it on the A string, then we're just repeating what we already said. So hopefully that is a little bit clearer for you. So take this time, take a short pause to look over your guitar and understand that every fret is just a half step. It's just a minor second. That's it. So as long as you're going fret to fret, it's always going to be a minor second. It can never be anything else. There's no other way. That's how the guitar is made. So as long as you remember that, it'll make things a lot easier, okay? And we're going to start building the chords now. So we're going to take the chords we already know and love, and we're going to rebuild them using the logic we have now, using the wisdom that we have to better understand what the chords actually are, how they work, and how, most importantly, we can change them, okay? So take a short break, and I'll meet you right back here. So we just covered the arguably most important thing about the layout of the guitar. Now we need to put it into practice. So maybe you practiced it on your own, the intervals, right, and the minor second idea, the half step idea between each fret. Now we need to create that scale again. So we talked about natural note scale. We talked about chromatic scale. Scale just means a collection of tones played in a series. So we can create any one that we want, but it's important for us to understand which one is the 1, which one is the 5, and so on and so forth. So let's just do an exercise. Let's start on G. So here's the G note on the 3rd fret of your E string. So we're going to say that G is number 1. We're going to hold that number in our head and kind of glue it with G. So G equals 1, all right? Now, if we want to play the next tone, we could play G sharp. But for the sake of, I don't know, posterity and, I don't know, teaching a more fundamental scale, we'll go from G to the next possible alphabet letter, which will be A. And for that, you just play the 5th fret on the E string, right? That distance from the 1 to the 2 is a major 2. I hear that as happy or big, so it's a big step. It's a major 2. If I played the minor 2, it's a little sadder, it's a little smaller, it's minor. So minor 2, the Jaws theme, or major 2. A little bit more hopeful, a little bigger, okay? Moving on to the next one. We want to play the 3. So the 3 is going to be some kind of, let's see, G, A, B, some kind of B. So we know that B is here on the 7th fret. If we played here, it would be a B flat. So from G to B flat would be the minor 3rd. And from G to B natural, as they say, or just a straight standard vanilla B note, would be the major third. So from here on the 3rd fret, we have G as 1. On 5, we have 2, A. And now we're adding that 3. So you have a choice, either minor or major. Here's minor. Here's major. Again, for the sake of posterity, let's go ahead and do this with the natural notes, so the natural tones. G is 1, A is 2, B is 3. Next, we're gonna try to find, so G, A, B, we're gonna try to find the 4. And it's gonna be a perfect 4th, right? So G, A, B, that's 3. Go up 1 more and we have a perfect 4th. Right on. So from G to C is a perfect 4th. If we go up 1 more half step right here, that's the tritone, right? So G to tritone. But we don't have to play that. That's the special kind of the 4. We can keep it as a perfect 4th right here and avoid that tritone. So G is 1, A is 2, B is 3, C will be 4 right there, the perfect 4. And we're going to skip over the tritone to get to the 5. And that's D. So from G is 1, A is 2, B is 3, C is 4, a perfect 4, and skip over the tritone to get to the 5, the perfect 5, D. If we went up just one more step, one half step right here, that would be the minor 6, but we will take the major 6. So from D to E. So D was the perfect 5. Skip over the minor 6 to get to the major 6 right here on E. So G is 1, A is 2, B is 3, C is 4, D is 5, E is 6. We only have one more tone in this scale, and that's the 7. It's going to be some kind of F. Right next door is F. Cool, good enough. So we go E, up a half step to F, and then all we need is to finish it with the octave, the G on top, which is up here on the 15th fret. So all this was done on the E string. G was 1, A was 2, B was 3, C was 4, D was 5, E was 6, a major 6, all let's see, I think major, yeah, major, all major. Then the perfect with this major 6, and we played here the F, right? So that would be a minor 7 because it's F. If we played F sharp, it would be a major 7, right? So now we're going to do the intervals. So from G to A is a major 2nd. Then from A to B is another major 2nd. From B to C is a minor 2nd. It's right next door. And from C to D is a major 2nd. From D to E, major 2nd. From E to F is a minor 2nd. And from F to G is a major 2nd. That's how intervals work. So you can either do it from the first note to whatever distal note you're going to, or you can do it proximal, you can do it stepwise and go G to A to B, B to C, and count, right? Major, major, minor, major, major, minor, major. Really, really important to start doing that early in your career, as early as you can, because it just enables you to communicate with other musicians so clearly about what you're going for, what you want, what you hear in your head maybe, or whether something sounds wrong or not. If something sounds wrong, you can identify it by saying, sounds like you played a major 2nd there. It was supposed to be a minor 2nd. So it's really just language to empower you and give you a bigger toolkit. Right on. So that's explaining the scale degrees, the intervals, and now we can get into the chords. So when we play, for example, the A minor chord down here, we're playing 0, 0, 2, 2, 1, 0, right? And that A minor chord is composed of 3 notes. which is weird because we have 6 strings, but 3 notes are all we're hearing. I'll go through them one by one. E on top, then comes A, then comes E. So we have E, A, E. Then we have A, then C, and E. So you see, it's not perfectly in order. It's not just going A, C, E, A, C, E. It's kind of got notes in different spots. And that's, again, kind of the beauty of guitar. So let's break down how that worked. If we just played all of the strings without holding anything in our left hand, we would have E, A, D, G, B, E. It actually is a chord, but it's a very complicated jazz chord. We make sense of it. So this thing's already complicated on its own. We just make sense of it by holding our fingers down. So we're actually forcing the guitar to play something simple. In this case, we're trying to make it play 3 notes only. A, C, or E, nothing else. So we have to fix some of the strings to do that. The top one's fine, it's giving us E. The next one's giving us A, also fine. The third one down, that D string, would have been D, but we don't want that. We want either A, C, or E. So we had to modify this D string to produce E. Same thing goes for the G string. We needed to modify the G because we wanted A, C, or E. So we turned that G into an A. With that B string, we didn't want B, we wanted C. So we put our index down on that first fret. And finally, we have the E string at the bottom. So how I figured out where to put those fingers was very simple logic. I just went, okay, if I'm trying to play an A, C, E, an A chord, I'm gonna need those 3 notes, the A, C, E, and not all those strings work that way. So the D string, I thought, what is the closest possible tone that I can make with the D string, right? Well, I know that E is just a little bit above D, so I went up a whole step, or I went up a major second and held down my finger to make the E note. With the G string, I use the same logic. Well, I'm looking for A, C, or E. The closest one to the G would be A, right above it, also a major second above. Finally, the B string, I needed to make into something else, A, C, or E. Well, A would have been down lower, and that's not possible, but C is right next door, so that's what lets me put my index here. And now I have 3 notes on 6 strings. That is the theory that goes into building chords on guitar, and it works for every single one. So if I played a C chord, I could map this out for you. Now you might ask, how do you know which notes go in the chord? Well, again, most of the time when you're making chords, you skip the alphabet letter in between them. So for example, if you start with 1, and let's say it's C, well then the next one would skip the D and go to E. So you'd have 1, 3, and 5. That's typically how you organize these chords. So if you start with C, you would have C, E, and G. Now if you kept C as the number 1 and you wanted to make a different chord altogether, let's say you wanted to start the chord on D, well you could do the same thing. You would just take 2, 4, and 6. So D, F, and A. And if you continued on even farther with that logic, so let's say you kept C as number 1, but you wanted to create a chord on the E, well you would start on that, so that'd be 3, you'd skip over it, get 5, skip over another one, and get 7. So 3, 5, and 7, in that case, E, G, and B. So this circular logic allows you to play many different chords, and not always are they going to be major or minor. Sometimes they will change. That's because of the intervals. Okay, so what can you do now? Well, you can start playing those chords you know and love, and you can start to identify the notes that are inside of them and figure out whether you're playing 3 notes across all 6 strings, or if you're playing something else, maybe something that doesn't belong. Okay, a good example of this is in the D major chord. So in the D major chord, we usually play X00232, right? Now the reason we play X instead of 0 or instead of the E string is because E does not belong in a D major chord. A D chord, if you make D1, well, what would be 3? Well, some kind of F, right? So you'd have D, then some kind of F, and then you would need some kind of A. So if you just, say, arbitrarily kept D, F, and A, it would actually be minor, right? And the E still does not belong, so we don't play that top string. To my ear, it's interesting, but to most people, I think that sounds completely wrong. Okay, better would be to ignore that top string. There we go. So just break down what that D minor chord is. So for example, the top string is E, so that's not D, F, or A, so we're not going to play it. Then the A string, well, that's A, so we're happy there. Then we have D, we're happy there too. The G, I'm holding on the 2nd fret to create an A note. The B string, I'm holding on the 3rd fret to produce a D note. And my index here is to produce that F note. Now you could add your thumb here to this F right here. And that sounds kind of cool. Okay, so hopefully you're starting to understand that every time you play a chord, you're just modifying the strings to produce something simple. You're taking this complex thing and making it simple. So every single shape you have, I want you to go through, and it might seem tedious, but it will help. You're going to go through each chord shape, and you're going to identify which tone is being made by your fingers. Because then you're going to be able to transition between chords with more confidence. For example, if I'm playing C major, sure, I know that the shape for A is this. But I also know that C, E, G and A, C, E share 2 tones. They share C and they share E. So in the C major chord, it's C, E, G. And in the A minor chord, it's A, C, E. So they're sharing the C and the E, which means that the only ones that I'm worried about are the G notes, the G note and the A note, because they're not shared between both. So then I can figure out, well, hey, this one was my C major, and I'm worried about the G note. Well, where's my G note? Well, it's open, right? So if I wanted to, I could actually modify my shape. And now I'm kind of doing both chords. I'm doing a C major chord, but I'm also changing that G note to play A. So it's kind of like just making this into an A minor chord with this C included. And that's the power of the pinky, first of all, but second of all, that's the power of knowing how you can modify the chords to not only make the shapes make more sense, but to just transition nicely between them. So now, if I were to play like this, with this orientation of my fingers, it's a lot faster, it's a lot more efficient than going like this. Instead, I'm just keeping this finger right here. And I can even include it to make it interesting, right? So toy around with this. You have a lot of different chords to choose from. And really go for it. Try to see how you can change things to make it sound really interesting. And that, I think, is enough for today's class. So get out there, play with your guitar, experiment, do brand new things, have fun. I'll see you in the next one.